Welcome to CropCast Conversations, a podcast drawing on experience and advice from people working in the arable industry, covering a range of interesting topics. I'm Mark Boucher-Gibbs, and I'll be here every other month with a new episode. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss the work of the Maltsters Association of Great Britain. I'm glad to be joined with its Executive Director, Julian South. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Mark.
How are you?
Pretty good, thank you.
Good. And we were talking before we came on air, and I gather you're in the north. Was it northwest?
Northwest of England.
Yep.
So we're just south of the Lake District.
Okay. And I suppose your work is based in, where's the central office for the association?
Well, we operate an office in Newark-on-Trent, which of course used to be a really big town for the malting industry back in its heyday. But in reality, we work all the way from the south of England right up to the north of Scotland, and sometimes slightly beyond.
Yeah, you would do. So really today we're talking about malting barley, and I'm in farm consultancy, and just for the record, I'm calling from Edinburgh today, so we've got somebody in England and somebody in Scotland, which is quite pertinent. So we can talk about the relative merits of malting barley in both countries, and of course you cover the whole of Great Britain, so it's good that we've got you on today. Thank you for joining us. I just wondered, how did you come by the Maltsters Association of Great Britain? How long's your alliance been with the company?
Well, it goes back to the 1980s. My first introduction to malting was through working in Burton-on-Trent in the brewing industry. And the Maltsters Association, it's actually been around since 1827, but I've been actively involved for most of my career.
Have you? And the structure of how's the association governed? Quite a few people involved?
Yeah, so we have an executive committee, which is comprised of the main members of the association. We've got 11 companies in membership at the moment. I should say that in its origin, it was 1800.
Yes.
And the malting industry was a very different industry in those days.
Yeah.
So we've got 11 companies, and they're represented in our executive committee through mostly the managing directors or chief executives from those companies. Some of the smaller companies are represented through a single sort of nominee, but it's pretty tight industry.
Yeah, so and a lot of them are global players now. So give me a few of the association's members. It'd be people like Diageo and
but we've got the likes of Diageo, Bort Malt, Simpsons, Crisp, Muntons, and some of the whiskey distillers as well, because some of them are maltsters as well as distillers, as well as Diageo. So like Edrington, who have a maltings on Orkney, are a member, and Suntory Global Spirits have maltings at Lefroy and Bowmore, and up in Old Meldrum at Glengarry, also members. So we're quite a wide membership, and we have some craft businesses, small craft businesses as well. People like Warminster Maltings down in the south of England. We have smaller specialist players like French and Jops, who just produce coloured and roasted malts.
Yeah.
So it's quite a diverse sector. But you're right, some of the companies are actually global players. And so we do also have membership of our European Association. So our British companies can then have access into what's happening in Europe as well.
Oh, I didn't realise you had a European Association. Right. Okay. Gosh, I don't know where to go first. There's so much to talk about. You obviously cover a lot of the, your manufacturing, processing a food product. Obviously, there's lots that goes with that. Let's perhaps just start by saying what is malt?
Yeah, so malt is a product that you get when you take malting barley and you steep it, you germinate it, and you kiln it. So it's an intermediate product between beer and whiskey, and you can't ordinarily make beer or whiskey using just barley. You have to put it through the malting process. And I mean, that's a very quite a detailed sort of process. It's a controlled germination, and it's done for many reasons. One of which, of course, is to create a product which then has the flavour and aroma characteristics and is ready for producing either beer or whiskey in the brewing or distilling processes.
And I've got a vision of, in the olden days, they used to rake the barley over the floors, and a lot of it was hand work. I presume all that's gone now, or some of the craft industry is still using that method, or is it all vertical?
Absolutely, it's still there. It's still exists, and there are only in a small number of maltings, and only really a small proportion of what we produce is produced in the old what we call floor malting. And I mean, there was a time back in history when everybody malted that way, and there would have been hundreds, if not thousands, of small maltings, each producing malt for its customer. Sometimes and quite often the customer was actually the same company as the person producing the malt. Quite different nowadays, but some of our smaller producers do produce still what we call floor malted malt, and some of our bigger producers do on a small basis for customers, because there are customers that like to have something produced the old craft way. And in fact, if you go to a distillery where they have a maltings attached, it's almost certainly to be a small maltings, which is going to be a floor malted barley. And the interesting thing for us is, of course, that's what the if you go to a visitor centre at a distillery, that's what the general public might think, that all malt was produced that way.
Yeah,
That's not the case.
possibly. And then I suppose you've got distilling malts and brewing malts. Are there significant differences there?
Yes and no. In essence, the process is the same. So you got the same basic process, but the requirement for a distiller is very different from a requirement for a brewer when it comes to the final product. So for example, the distiller will be looking for alcohol in a way that the brewer looks for alcohol, but also looks for a lot more besides in terms of flavor and color. So for a distilling malt, you look at a much lower nitrogen barley, and you've got to use a specific variety for distilling. Sometimes same varieties can be used for both brewing and distilling, but there are also distinct varieties.
So we were talking about perhaps the differences in what Scotland and England produces in the way of malting barley. How do you feel the harvest went this year, Julian, across the country?
It was a challenge, Mark. It was a challenge, and I think anybody in the industry would say that. I mean, it was low yields across both England and Scotland. As you know, we had a very dry summer, and complete contrast to the previous season. Every year in the malting industry is different.
Yeah.
So I mean, how would I describe it in a nutshell? So there were high screenings, there was some high nitrogen. So maltsters had to spend a lot of time testing crops to check at intake, to check that they were suitable for malting. But we've got means to sort of check that fairly rapidly at intake. So there has been sufficient grain for malting. There was also a high carryover, I should say, from 2024 as well. Malting barley is an interesting crop in the sense that you can actually store it for quite a long time before you malt it. So maltsters do need to sort of keep stocks in order to ensure continuity of supply to their final customers.
And now, how long will it store for? So, a crop from 2024 harvest, they can carry that right round, can they?
You can, yeah. I mean, if it's stored correct, if it's stored under good conditions, I mean, moisture content needs to be suitably low. You need good quality storage conditions. But in theory, and also you need to keep checking your grains, check that it's still got its germination potential.
Yes, of course. Which can go, I suppose.
Yeah. There are things that can.
Is it about 98% germination?
98% is typically what a maltster would regard as a minimum standard for germination. The one thing you can't do is malt dead grains.
No.
I mean, you can do things with screenings. You can screen them out, and then typically you're looking at a maximum of 10%. This year we were seeing up to 15 and above. So there's a contractual discussion between grower and maltster in that case, and the maltster will screen out the small grains, and then we'll go into the sort of co-product line.
But, so am I right in thinking that a small grain that's a screening as such has a lower starch content and a higher fibre content?
It's got a higher nitrogen content, yeah. And if you think about what you're doing in malting, you're actually soaking grains in the first stage of the process and in the steeping process. So small grains and large grains have got to be hydrated to the same extent. So obviously, what you really want as a barley sample, which has got all of the grains of the same shape and size, so that they all absorb moisture to the same extent.
Yeah, in a perfect world, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And did England see the same degree of screenings that we saw here in Scotland?
In some parts, yes, but tended to be more nitrogen issues in England, and I mean, one thing that did come through from most areas, there was a lot of variability between different samples, depending on your soil type, and I mean, there's a lot of microclimates out there. I mean, if you just look at Scotland, I mean, like the Black Isle was very, very good compared to some other regions. There were differences, but within a region as well. So it was really quite a challenge for the maltsters because they were so variable.
Yeah, you don't appreciate what's involved once it goes over the weighbridge and
yeah. I think from a grower's perspective, it's quite a challenge to produce the same specification from even within a farm. Sometimes, as you probably know, there are different pockets of soil which are slightly different from others.
Yes, and I think this year we had such a dry spring, didn't we? Farmers really didn't know where they were in terms of nitrogen uptake from the nitrogen they put on the field. Was it going to get taken up? It sat there and probably volatilized off a fair bit of it.
Yeah.
So you've got that side of it. I know barley doesn't get much nitrogen anyway, but it's still a difficult ball to juggle if you're trying to trade off yield and low nitrogens in the grain.
Yeah.
Whilst we had quite a few screenings this year, more than quite a few, were there any positives from the harvest, Julian, that we perhaps haven't picked up on yet?
There were. I mean, the first one is moisture, of course. There was quite a lot of crops that came in at low moisture, which meant we didn't have to go through the extensive drying that would normally be required. And the other one, which was also very significant, was the low levels of mycotoxins, as far as we can determine so far. And if you look back over the last 2 to 3 years, one of the areas that's been a real issue has been ergot, the presence of ergot within crops. So this year, I mean, we're members of an ergot working group, which mixes with other sectors such as the wheat sector and the oats sector. And this year, across pretty much all cereal types, we've seen very low levels of ergot and very expected low levels of other mycotoxins, because we're still going through tests on some of them, but certainly the intake testing using the rapid kits would show there's very low levels of things like DON and T2H2, these fusarium toxins. So, but ergot has been a real intractable problem for quite some time. That having been said, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we don't know what the climate will be next year, and we're going to need to keep pressure on looking for ways to control ergot, and particularly to control it at source and in the field. So, to that end, AHDB have just published updated guidelines on ergot control for farmers.
I think I did notice on your website, actually, I think you graphed some of the reasons for some of the problems over the years, and ergot seemed to, over the last 2 or 3 years, seem to be quite bad.
It's been the biggest rejection for the last sort of 2 to 3 years. But if you go back in time, you'd find very little. So it's one of those things that can come and go.
And do you think it's linked more to wet weather I mean, is there a link between mycotoxins and ergot incidents, for example?
We think historically the growth in ergot within the crop is down to the fact that there's perhaps less deep ploughing. Perhaps if you bury ergot sclerotia,
Yeah.
they eventually die off. But so if you
Right.
move to min-till agriculture, you're risking the possibility of ergot. But it's not straightforward. We're discovering actually there's a
Yeah.
subtlety within there that's not easy to track. But certainly this year, what we believe, or the current theory is that ergot germination was very slow. So ergot spores were around in June as opposed to May. Of course, barley flowering was a bit early, so I I think it was almost for an ergot perspective, it was an imperfect storm. So
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
but there are lots of factors we don't fully understand, and there are some quite big opportunities for new research out there. Some of which we're tackling, and I think there's also a program at NIAB which is now looking more in more depth. A new PhD at NIAB.
Interesting. That sort of brings us on the way to how you evaluate and approve new barley varieties, for example, for malting. Are you involved in that chain of events?
Yes, so we manage the Malting Barley Committee, and the Malting Barley Committee is funded by the brewers, the distillers, and ourselves. So that's a committee that brings together everyone from the plant breeders through to the final end users, the brewers and distillers. And so barley that comes through on the recommended list from AHDBM, I would say we actually have we're also a co-sponsor of the recommended list, and
Right.
do a lot of work behind that as well. But when barley varieties are coming through for final approval, which which is done by the Malting Barley Committee, we have a very big role with that. We publish that list when it's ready. So there's a lot of micro malting, a lot of full scale malting, and then full scale brewing and distilling trials that go through before a barley variety is accepted. That's quite a process, actually.
And so I gather it's probably, is it provisional approval 1, provisional approval 2, then full approval? I
It
think
is.
that's, yeah,
It is.
yeah. And so what might we be see coming over the next season or two? Are there any new
Well,
varieties on those?
Laureate has been dominant for some time,
Mm, mm,
and I mean, if you look, and we publish the usage figures for different varieties on our website, and you see Laureate sort of dominating for a period of time. Look before that, you saw varieties like Concerto and Propino.
mm,
So
mm.
things do change. So we've got, I mean, some of the new varieties like Diablo that's coming through is looking pretty good. And what you're really looking for are spring varieties that have got dual purpose. So you grown for both brewing and distilling.
All right.
And so you've got Tennyson there as well, Firefox, which have just been approved. But I mean, Diablo is perhaps one to look at.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
that having been said, I still see a future for Laureate for some time yet. Seems to.
yeah,
I mean, I remember. I mean, in a sense, turnover of varieties has been substantial for some, and less so for others. And what you really want is a variety that you can grow that doesn't change in its agronomics, and that's because there's a lot of effort goes into approving these varieties for final use on the table.
and what constitutes a good variety that's good for both brewing and distilling?
Something that can respond well to nitrogen, and so I mean, obviously, you've got your big difference between your brewing and your distilling is your nitrogen content, and low nitrogen for distilling, high for brewing. Something that's got good agronomics both in England and Scotland, because you may want to grow it further south in England for brewing and then in Scotland for distilling. So you might want a variety that's got wide agronomic potential.
So do the breeders drive variety choice developments, or do the feedback from the maltsters saying we want a variety that does X, Y, Z, or do the breeders say, oh, we've developed a variety that does X, Y, Z?
Bit of both.
Bit of both.
Bit of
Yeah,
both. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I mean, our main interactions with the breeders are in the malt and barley committee, so the breeders are very well aware of what the industry is looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, one big push, of course, in the future is whether we go down the route of precision breeding and some of the sort of novel sort of traits that might be possible. But for this for us as a customer driven thing, we're not sure where that will go yet. So there's a lot of discussions in the malt and barley committee around approving specialist varieties that perhaps wouldn't naturally come through the normal approvals process.
Yeah. And do they meet monthly or quarterly or 6
Twice a
monthly?
year.
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
Okay.
In fact, the next meeting is coming up in November,
Yeah.
and the aim is to produce an update to the malt and barley committee approved list in May, which happened, and if there's any further update to that can go through in November. So just twice a year, but there's a lot of work goes on in the background.
But there is, and as an association, it probably just doesn't stop at involvement in varieties. It's also things like ag chem use, withdrawal periods, and
It is
minimal
it
residuals.
Yeah, we publish what I call or what's called an accepted list of agrochemicals. So this is a committee which is comprised of maltsters, brewers, and distillers, and this approves agrochemicals for use which won't have any impact on the brewing process. So won't impact on yeast characteristics or the flavour, and so having a agrochemical approved through regulatory approval is one thing, but you then have to have it approved onto our accepted list, which is owned and published by the BBPA, the Brewers and Pubs Association. And although it's brewing focused, it is also something which some of the distillers like to look at as seeing what would happen, because if it caused a problem for yeast in brewing, it would say do the same in distilling.
Yeah. Gosh, it's a minefield, I should think.
And of course, there's constant regulatory pressure on agrochemicals. So we're constantly working with the industry to be sure that what we've got is going to be continued approved for the future.
And since Brexit, I suppose, do we have the ability to make our own rules around pesticide use? No, we're still sort of bound by some EU certification.
We can make our own rules, and there are some differences. I mean, an example is glyphosate, which is still available for late use, so desiccant use, effectively in the UK, but it's not available for that within Europe. So there are differences.
Yeah.
But of course, as we move towards a common SPS agreement with Europe, this may change. So we may converge again, having diverged.
Yeah. It's funny.
It's something which we as a sector follow closely, and particularly through our European Trade Association.
Yeah, you'll be involved in research and development, I'm sure. I think you mentioned before the International Barley Hub. That seems to come across as a huge, ambitious project. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were an early stakeholder with the International Barley Hub. So this is located in Dundee at the James Hutton Institute, and it was coming together of all parties, all stakeholders within the barley supply chain, through from breeders right through to end customers. And so it focuses on a new building, a new research building. So there was a £60 million investment from Scottish and Westminster governments for that building. Subsequent to that, there's been the award from BBSRC of a large grant for PhD students. So we've got now 40 PhD students, all focused on barley research, working primarily on climate, soil, and stability of barley within the supply chain, not just in Scotland but globally. The word international is sometimes perhaps overlooked.
Yeah.
So we are sponsoring 3 PhDs and other stakeholders, distillers, brewers, other maltsters, and plant breeders are sponsoring others. But the benefit is that everybody is party to all 40 PhDs within the program. So it's a real networking club of research, everything aimed at barley for the
And
future.
has that got a defined timeline, or is it sort of a 5-year project, or is it
The
open-ended?
PhDs, the final tranche of PhDs, what we call cohort 4, have just started. So they will be 4-year PhDs, which will have a year in industry. And following that, we're anticipating further investment in order to continue that program. It's certainly not a one-off. It's something which we hope will continue. But of course, all of that is dependent on funding. Certainly, the PhDs that exist, these are training PhDs, so these are people that will go on to work within the industry, and we will follow that by more research.
What do you think the biggest challenges are for the malting barley industry then? We've been involved in carbon accounting, and we look at the malting barley supply chain, and I think it's fair to say that the farm part of that supply chain, the farmers growing the malting barley, account for about 30% of the carbon footprint of the final product. Is there sort of great ambition to reduce carbon footprints of the supply chain, or are there other things such as water sustainability, or because I presume you're a big user of water as well still?
Yeah, we're in a. I mean, sustainability is one of the biggest challenges that we have, and most maltsters are already operating with pretty efficient plants. Quite a few. I mean, are now implementing some pretty big investments in terms of uh, sort of net zero, aiming towards net zero. So we've got things like hydrogen projects, we've got biomass plants. We've got one company which is using offshore wind to fire its kilns. So we're an energy intensive industry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the industries that benefits from a climate change agreement with government. It's something, in fact, that we manage on behalf of the sector at MAGB. But of course, the majority of carbon within a glass of beer or a bottle of whiskey is generated from the barley that we grow. So we're working very closely with farmers, with growers to develop sustainable systems within agriculture. And there are, if you just look around the websites of some of our member companies, there are significant strides in terms of regenerative farming. And there's quite a lot of people now working within grower groups to try and promote more sustainable practices. So we're tackling it both from a scope 1, a scope 2, and a scope 3 perspective.
Yeah. No, certainly Diageo, we're involved with them, and we've got 18 farmers across Scotland that are looking at regen ag measures and trying to reduce and doing soil analysis for looking at how we can improve soils and reduce the carbon footprint. So I've seen it sort of firsthand. But it is, looking on the website, I was quite astounded by the scope of something like £40 million, is it, that was put in originally?
Yep. Yeah.
And you'll be working with assurance schemes, so Scottish Quality Crops and Red Tractor, do you advise on what you want to be in there as part of the assurance?
Yeah, absolutely. We sit on, I personally sit on the board at both Red Tractor and SQC.
Right.
And so, I mean, we've been, to be able to supply a malting company needs assurance either with Red Tractor or SQC. So, and that's really important for us in terms of food safety and traceability. And I mean, we've tried, we view those schemes as a way for managing a number of elements within our supply chain without needing to have multiple audits. So really
Things like
important.
contaminants, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on that this year we've seen quite a carryover from 2024 harvest. I wondered what's the Is there much international trade between the UK and Europe, particularly in terms of barley exports and imports? Not sure that I think there is a huge amount, but I suppose every season is different, and we don't always produce the tonnage or the quality that we want. Or sometimes do we have more than we need?
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of malt, there is an export uh, quantity of malt. It's not huge. I mean, we're exporting in the region of up to 200,000 tons a year worldwide. Some does go to Europe, and but the bigger destinations are Japan and the United States. I mean, we export to something like 50 different countries around the world. Some of it's very small quantities, and but there's a good export of brewing malt to the United States for the craft beer sector, and there's a good export of distilling malt to Japan for and also brewing malt. So but it's relatively small in comparison with what it used to be, in comparison with our domestic supply. I mean, in terms of malt and barley, there is actually barley going as well, of course, but generally not necessarily from the maltsters.
Right, because I think it was it 1.6 million tons of malt from a 2 million ton crop,
That's correct.
and
Yeah,
of that, what sort of percentage would that be that sort of finds its way abroad? Not a lot, as you say.
up to 5%.
So it is quite small.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
small. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, we split our sales between brewing, distilling, food, and export, and distilling is the larger by substantial amount, something like 58 to 60% of the total.
mm, yeah. And do you see brewing sort of declining further with the sort of you hear about the young generation turning away from alcoholic drinks so much?
That's certainly true. I mean, we see the growth in zero and no alcohol products as a possible opportunity to take some of that back. But I mean, there has been a gradual decline in the brewing sales over many years, and I think that it is changing habits. Changing. I mean, you only have to walk down the high street and see how many pubs are closing uh,
Yeah,
on a yeah, almost a weekly basis in some cases. So there are changes. I mean, COVID had a really big change as well. So a lot more people started drinking at home during COVID. So there has been a switch from sort of drinking in the on trade to drinking in the off trade, which is cans and bottles at home. Which is, I mean, for us, we'd rather people were drinking at home than not drinking at all,
yeah,
within reasonable limits, of
yeah,
course. But I think it's very difficult to predict where the future will go with future drinkers. But certainly, if you look worldwide, I think there will be a growth, and particularly a growth in the premium markets. So there are opportunities for large large brewing companies and smaller brewers as well to export, which we hope would include British malt.
yeah. Do we put tariffs on products that come from USA in terms of their bourbon and in because I presume we've got tariffs on have we got tariffs on malt leaving the country at all?
The other than those countries which have free trade agreements, I mean, obviously there's a tariff on malt to the United States captured in the sort of more general sort of 10% tariff, which is
Yeah.
was brought in under the sort of Trump regime.
Mm.
So, I mean, the big opportunity, I mean, is India with the free trade negotiations for an Indian agreement for the Scotch whisky sector would be a significant boost for the distilling sector. And a boost for the distilling sector is a boost for the malting sector, and there's a boost for the farmer.
Yeah. Let's hope so.
So
Yeah.
we await in anticipation the conclusion of the India deal. And so far the messages that have been coming have been quite good.
It's funny how different markets open up. I heard on the radio today that uh, the China has switched to South American soya from North American soya since the tariffs, and actually Donald's done South America a bit of a favour in terms of their export ability. So
I think it's. I think you forget how intertwined an
yeah.
global economy we live in, and a small change in one region can have a much bigger change elsewhere. Sometimes not in the way that you would have expected.
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask you when we were talking about sustainability was the flavorings that you use, and peat, I think, was something you mentioned previously in an earlier conversation we had. What's the extent of the requirement for peat as a flavouring for malt, and does it have a future? Do you have any sort of mitigation?
Well, it's a really important area for us actually, because even though if you look on the shelves of the number of peated whiskies, there's a lot of blends that also contain portions of peated whiskey. So it's a much higher proportion of spirit containing some element of peated peated flavour. Of course, all of the peated flavour comes from the malt because the peat is burned to produce the flavour in the malt. And at the moment, the amount of malt that we produce, which is peated, is relatively small, but it has a significant impact on the overall flavour across a huge range of number of peated brands of whiskey. So there is pressure because we take less than 1% of the peat that is extracted, and but there is pressure to stop that. And what we are doing is we're promoting the sensible, sustainable extraction of peat and the restoration of peat bogs to make sure that whatever we take out, we put back and put more back besides. But it's a challenge. We work closely with Scottish Government through the SWA, through the Scottish Whisky Association, in order to get that message across, because the amount that we extract for malting is pretty small by comparison with the amount that has been extracted for horticulture, for example.
Yeah.
But we don't want to be swept under the same bus.
Yeah. It's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much. I wondered a couple of points to finish on, I suppose, is where can people find more information about the Maltsters Association of Great Britain?
Right, so we have quite a deep website. There's a lot of information on the website, and we regularly keep that updated with new information. And so some of the educational establishments that are teaching agriculture and malting and brewing even use that for source of information. And if there's anything specific you require which is not on the website, you'll find there's a form on the website. Just send in an inquiry. And but I'll be surprised if you didn't find out what you need from the website. We try to keep it as updated as possible and as comprehensive as possible.
Yes, I think certainly, speaking for myself, I didn't quite realise the extent of the work that you were doing behind the scenes. And I say behind the scenes because farmers typically deal with the grain merchants, and you're looking at the maltsters and the guys that then take that grain and process it. But it's very interesting to see what's involved, and I wonder what your thoughts are on where the industry might be in, say, 10 years' time. Are you seeing any subtle shifts in markets or consumption?
Well, the first thing is I think we'll definitely be here.
Yeah.
We're as a society, we've been drinking beer and whiskey for millennia.
Yeah.
And I don't see that changing soon. The patterns might change. The industry is certainly changing because obviously, we've now got fewer companies, say, than we had 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and they tend to be more interconnected globally. But production methods have changed as well. So we've got significant strides in sustainability. And that having been said, it's still a very traditional industry. We're still using a natural process, which is germinating barley and kilning barley. So there's still a lot of heritage and tradition there, but we're using science and technology to do that in a more sustainable and more sort of modern way. Who knows where we will go in terms of barley breeding? That's a big question on the block, and that's something we as a society we're tackling.
I think the science and technology side of it is probably fascinating when you look at the Innovation Hub work and what looks to be going on there in terms of utilization of nitrogen and CO2 manipulation. Those are a couple of things that sort of jumped out at me. So it's obviously not an industry that's standing still.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for joining me. And I wish you all the well, Julian. And no doubt, probably we'll talk again at some point. Maybe have you back another year.
Yeah, I would just leave with one comment if I can.
Do.
Which is I would encourage people when you next pick up a pint of beer or a glass of whiskey to think about the heritage and tradition and the amount of work that's gone into that, both from the grower, the maltster, and then the brewer or distiller. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay, many thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for joining us for this episode of CropCast Conversations. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, you may enjoy some of our other Farm Advisory Service podcasts. This podcast was presented by me, Mark Boucher-Gibbs, produced by Heather Stewart, edited by Cameron Waugh, with executive producers Kirsten Blackwood and Kerry Hammond. Come back next time for more CropCast Conversations.
The Farm Advisory Service podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business, and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.